Okay, so let's find the diatonic chord progression in C major. That is to say, let's find all the possible chords that are going to work in C major. Okay, so let's start with the usual thing. The thing that I've been always starting with when talking about this kind of stuff is I'm just going to redraw my all my possible notes in the key of C. So I'm just going to do my pattern. So whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. I told you that it would be handy to memorize that because it's handy to be able to just print that out on the screen all the time. Okay, so now we know that in order to build chords, what we can do is we can basically take every other note. As long as we stick to a key, we'll be just fine to do that. So let's take this and let's just nudge it over here so we can just barely see it. And let's start with our C major chord. Oops. Okay, so there's C major, okay, our first chord. Now we're going to go up the whole scale and build a chord using every other note. So here's D, and then I'm going to skip one. I'm going to go F. Skip one, and go A. Now I'm going to go to E. I'm going to build an E chord. Skip one, and I have a B. Now I'm going to go to the next note, F. Skip one to A. Skip B to C. Now G. Skip A, go to B, skip C, go to D. Now I have to kind of extend up another octave in order for this to work, but it will. That's just fine. We go to A, skip B, we go to C, skip D, and we end up on E. Scroll up a little bit here. Here's our B chord. Skip C, go to D, skip E, go to F, and now we're back to C. And let's put our C in there again. So C, skip D, go to E, and skip F, and go to G. Now, this chord is the same as this chord, except it's an octave higher, right? Let me zoom out just a hair so we can fit all that on the screen. Okay. Now let me get rid of our extra chord notes here. Great. So this is our diatonic chord progression. These are all the chords that are possible, all the triads that are possible in the key of C major. Okay, so let's just hear it and get it. Let's just get it in our head a little bit. What all our possible chords are in order. There it is. Let's slow that down just a touch. Okay, so that's what it sounds like when they're all in order. Now, when we write a song, we never use these in order, actually. You'll never find a song that goes from a C chord to a D chord to an E chord to an F chord to a G chord. That would be really weird. I'm going to tell you how to put them together later, but I want to point out one more thing. Now, what I did here to make all of these chords was I took the scale and then every other note, right? Then I started on the second tone of the scale, every other note. Then the third tone of the scale, every other note, etc. But you could look at it another way. What I did here is if you just follow the bottom notes, it's just the scale going up. That's just the scale. And then starting on the third, which is the third of the chord, which is what we call this note, we have the C major scale just starting on E. So E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. And then right here we have the C major scale starting on G. G up to G. Right? So it's just the scale going up in thirds, really. A third and a fifth. Now remember that when we did this kind of a thing before, we saw that our first chord turns out to be a major chord when we're in a major key, which we are now. Our second chord turns out to be a minor chord, right? And you remember why? Because the amount of half steps here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Therefore, that's a minor chord. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Therefore, that's a major chord. So here is, now remember a while ago when we learned the pattern for the major scale, the the whole step, half step, etc. When we learned that, I said something like, I'm not really big on making you memorize stuff, but this is going to be something that you should really memorize. And I think I said it's probably going to be one of two things I'm going to ask you to memorize in this class. So we've come to the other thing, the other pattern that I'm going to ask you to memorize. And that is the pattern of the diatonic chord progressions, specifically the alterations of major and minor chords. Because you don't want to have to draw this out every time. You just want to be able to know this off the top of your head. So here's what you need to remember. You need to remember that the first chord is a major chord. When we do a diatonic chord progression in any key, the first chord is always going to be a major chord. The second chord is always going to be a minor chord. The third chord is always going to be a minor chord. The fourth chord is going to be a major chord. The fifth chord is going to be a major chord. The sixth chord is going to be a minor chord. The seventh chord is going to be this weird, goofy one. We call this a diminished chord. It's kind of like a super minor chord. Remember earlier I said we kind of avoid the seventh chord of the scale. It causes some unique problems. So we're going to call this a diminished chord, and we'll talk more about it in a minute. And then we're back up to the root, which is another major chord. So the pattern that you should memorize is major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, major. That is the pattern of a diatonic chord progression. Let me give you a more practical example of why that's useful. You're writing a song, and you say, okay, I'm in the key of C major, just because let's do what's on the screen, I guess. I'm in the key of C major. What chords can I use? Give me another chord that I haven't used yet. What you can do is you can look through this whole list and hopefully do it in your head and say, well, I haven't used E minor chord yet, and that fits in key perfectly well. So that would be a good one to use. Maybe I haven't used an A minor chord yet. That's totally in key. A G major chord, an F major chord, a D minor chord. Those are all good options. So that's why we care about this diatonic chord progression, because it shows us all the possible chords in a given key and tells us how to find them.